Hey everyone, we're back for CISPA TLDR with a very special episode. TLDR is short for Too Long Didn't Read because the idea is that we talk about all the research that is usually buried in long, complicated papers. This episode is special because we don't have one, but two guests. Our faculty, Dr. Michael Schwarz, and a guest from Austria, from TU Graz to be exact, Andreas Kogler. Hi guys, thanks for being here.
Hi, thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you.
Andreas, what are you doing here at CISPA and how did you like your stay?
That's a good question. It was really cool to visit Michael at his new working place, basically. He came from Graz, so same university where I'm from. So yeah, I knew Michael for a long time. So when he was back in Graz, he was basically one of my supervisors for my master thesis. And then he brought me a bit into PhD research and that stuff. So he brought me into this. So yeah.
So now you're doing your PhD at TU Graz?
Yes, exactly.
And were you also doing joint research when you were here at CISPA?
Yeah, that was the basic idea, that I visit his group and get in touch with Daniel and Lucas, so the two PhD students of his group, or there are more, but these are the ones who were basically in his office the whole time. And yeah, we had a few ideas. We're trying to focus on a few ideas. Let's see where that goes. So.
Okay, all right. This sounds great. But you said that you two have been working together in the past, and you two have also recently been working together, which made quite some waves around the tech community. I think it's fair to say that you two and your colleagues are responsible for making sure that Intel and AMD's developers can take their vacations in time. So I think it's fair to say that you two are the CPU manufacturer's worst nightmare. Why is that? Can you tell me what you are doing? What is your research about?
Yeah, usually we focus on Intel or AMD CPUs and basically try to find the vulnerabilities there. So basically a loophole in the hardware design or in the hardware software design to find a way to extract data from the CPU.
Yeah, we are going down this one layer. So everybody was working on vulnerabilities in code, finding bugs in code. Everybody thought like CPUs, they are hardware. Why should there be bugs? They work. And we showed, no, they don't. They are also written just in software nowadays and then synthesized into hardware. And they have also the same types of bugs that we see on the software level. So this is something that we started basically back when I started my PhD in 2016. And yes, as you said, Tobias, we kept the CPU vendors busy. I wouldn't say we're their nightmare. Actually, they kind of like us because they now know about the bugs before anyone else does. We work together with them. So we make sure that actually CPUs are more secure and not set the world on fire.
And actually it evolved a bit more into like a communication channel between Intel and other vendors and the researchers, because it's not like one side we report something and never hear back. We also get a lot of feedback on we don't get usually the root cause for what we found, because often that differs a bit, but we got a lot of information from the vendors in general.
Okay.
Yeah, that also improved a lot. So when I started my PhD and you find a bug in hardware and you report that, vendors didn't really know how to deal with that. That was something new to them that wasn't known. So that was complicated, and it took a while until they understand like, people are doing that not to destroy us or something, but they are genuinely interested in these things and want to make the world a more secure place and want to report that and want the vendors to fix that and not, want money or something.
Yeah.
We had calls back then in 2017 where one of the vendors asked like, who are you? What do you want? Do you want money or something?
Are you trying to extort us?
Exactly. It's like, no. We just want to tell you that there's a problem in your product that you might want to fix.
Yeah. But maybe let's go back to the beginning. As you said, like the research you did in your PhD. I think most everyone that is kind of even a little bit into computers and the tech scene has heard of Meltdown and Spectre. And are these the two that you found like back in 2017 or 2016 in your PhD?
Yes, that was back in 2017. That's how it all started, basically, with like the public attention to that. Before that, we were working on side channels. but haven't found any real bugs in CPUs. But with Meltdown, that was the real first bug that we discovered. And that started in end of 2017, actually with some drinks.
Like always.
Not like always, but back then it's like you have a few drinks in the evening and then you discuss stuff that seems super unplausible. And then we talked with a researcher before, and Anders Fogg, and he was like, hey guys, we should look at that. Like, they're doing things not in the correct order. They're having this out of order execution. And I'm pretty sure that they don't check whether this is always safe with all the side effects. And we were like, if that's the case, then somebody would have found that already.
Yeah. Why didn't they think of that?
Exactly.
So
I mean, that's like a super trivial idea. I'm pretty sure we are using this concept for like 10, 20 years now. Somebody would have seen that. And he was like, you're probably right.
Yeah. Can you maybe, for the people that don't know, can you maybe like shortly explain like what a side channel attack is and what these out of order executions that happen in Inspector mean?
Yes. So our simple model of when we use a computer is we have a computer program. It consists of code, of instructions, and we assume they are executed one by one in the order we define them in the application. And this is not actually the case. So to make things fast, CPUs reorder the instructions and then execute them as fast as possible by doing things in parallel. And that also leads to side effects. All these executions lead to side effects that we can observe, like different power consumption, different execution times, and so on. And these are the things we want to observe. And from that, we can infer what actually happens inside the CPU.
And it's also a bit from legacy point of view, because CPUs were optimized for performance only. So in the past, we always optimized for performance. And that's why we get here, because the CPUs, they no longer, if you build a legacy CPU with the classical model, execute one by one, we would be back in 2000s, something like that.
Probably even earlier, yeah. So it's a very, very cool performance optimization of doing things in parallel. It's a bit like cooking. So if you look at a recipe, it's always a nice thing I like to use for explanations. If you look at a recipe, then you have the steps. You can imagine that are like instructions in an application. And then you don't go like you do the first step, and when you're finished, you go to the next one. But you first read over the steps and see what you can parallelize. So you can see, okay, step number 3 is heating the pan. So you already do that. And then you go back to 1 and wash your vegetables or something like that. So you also do that in real life. You look at all the things you have to do and try to parallelize them and make it faster in the end.
So if your sauce is fresh and hot, but you haven't even started cooking the pasta water,
exactly,
you have a problem when your guests arrive.
And in the end, it says like serve with rice, and then it's like, what rice?
The perfect explanation for stalling. So basically, if the CPU mispredicts or something, then it has to rewind everything, and then you lose time. That's basically.
Okay. So CPUs were optimized for performance by kind of enabling them to order their executions in their own way, like as in the most efficient way. An algorithm decides that probably. So
yes,
and there was a problem in there.
And yes, and now imagine what happens if you do things before you do something else, like you heat your oven before you wash the vegetables, and then you have like an exception. So you figure out you don't have any vegetables. So then that's a kind of a problem. And you already heated the oven. And in real life, that's not a huge problem. You turn it off again and then you go shopping. But in CPU terms, that can be a problem, because then the CPU already did something it was not supposed to do. Like accessing data it's not supposed to access, because it normally can't do that. And it also reverts that, so you don't really see it. But we have these side channels, these side effects. So this execution already had a side effect on some of the internal states of the CPU. And well, since like 2014, we are able to make them visible. And that was the huge problem then. So it looked like everything is sane, but actually this execution with data that's not supposed to be accessed left some traces that we can now make visible with side channel attacks. And from that, infer the data that was accessed. And
I think that it's a good point to cut in and just say, so there's the architectural point of view where you can't observe these effects. So from the software's perspective, everything's fine. Software is not broken, everything works out. But if you use the side channels, you can take a view into the microarchitecture, and there you see these side effects which have already been placed.
Okay. So a side effect is something like execution time.
Exactly.
So how long
or the energy consumption.
Yeah.
Or whether some memory was already transferred to a faster memory or not.
Okay. I remember, I think it was 1 or 2 years ago, actually, when you arrived at CISPA, you released a paper called Platypus, or it was a technique called Platypus, or an exploit called Platypus. And
it's like all of that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, it's all combined. It's a paper exploit technique.
Yes, and there we talk exactly about one of the side effects about power consumption.
Yeah, and you two worked on that together. That's right?
Yes, that's basically my origin story. So that was my back in Graz. I joined the Institute for Applied. It's a hard name.
You joined the institute where you're currently working.
Yes. So back in Graz, basically I joined the institute where I'm currently at. And so back then, Michael and the group, the people there, they had the idea that you can exploit energy consumption from software. And this was back in 2017.
That was in 2017, yes. Was like a boring evening, and I was reading an Intel manual. I sometimes do that. It's like you have 5,000 pages of highly technical details, and if you can't sleep, read a few pages, you will fall asleep.
It's like studying Latin in high school.
Yeah, exactly. And then I read some pages, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. That they have an interface that gives you the current power consumption. Like, that's fascinating. And before that, I heard a lecture where people did that in physical devices, oscilloscopes.
Yeah. So when you read that, you couldn't sleep anymore.
Yes, exactly. And they're like, they do that with oscilloscopes to measure the power consumption. They get the secrets out of that.
I mean, it's known since the 80s, I guess. The first power analysis. It's called power analysis text, where you just measure the power and see what the thing you're measuring is doing. Okay. And it's usually targeted at super small devices like smart cards or the chips on the smart cards, or even microcontrollers, so the smaller chips, basically. And now we have like a CPU, an Intel CPU, super fledged out CPU, general purpose CPU that has basically a software interface for, hey, give me the power. What are you currently consuming? And it's like, cool.
Okay. That was pretty nice. And yes, as you said, I couldn't sleep then. And I experimented a bit. And unfortunately, this interface was like not fast enough. So applications run like super fast with billions of instructions per second. And so you don't really see anything.
Yeah.
And I was a bit disappointed, of course. And then I slowed down an application like artificially, and it worked, but this is not a realistic case. So I dropped that basically.
The main purpose of the interface is basically if you have a laptop and you used it for, let's say, a minute, that you get like an average energy consumption so that you can control how much battery you're using. Yeah. Should I clock down in order to save battery, something like that. So like the operating system view to the battery, something like that.
So it's actually something that was done like in a good intention for developers to be able to
optimize power consumption.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
But that's not the only thing it can be used for.
Exactly. Like I dropped this idea because then we also had Spectre meltdown and we were a bit busy with that. Yeah.
And also we had another problem back then. There was no thread model where it could actually work because it's like an interface from the CPU. Yeah. It's like a privileged interface. So only the operating system can access it. And back then there was nothing like these trusted execution environments we have today, where you have like a strong attacker that could also be the operating system.
Okay.
And so even if it worked out, it would be hard to reason about why it makes sense from an attacker's point of view. And basically then 2018 was the Meltdown Spectre release, the public one.
Yes. At some point you came by and wanted a master thesis.
Yes. and then he just pitched this idea to me.
Exactly. I mean, I knew you I know you for 10 years around now. And I know Andy is like this super low level guy, and he likes to work with electronics and physical effects.
Okay.
It was actually
Look at
quite
that.
interesting because back then I worked in the automotive industry, so more on like low-level building PCs and programming PCs. And I also stumbled over that interface and actually used it before I knew that you can exploit it just to read energy consumption.
Okay.
So I was like, hey, yeah, I know that. It's cool.
Yeah, you were the target group what it designed it for, like to optimize power consumption.
I mean, each interface is for useful in some way without exploitation.
I mean, isn't that the kind of the whole idea with side channel attacks? So you build something that is built in like, as I said, in good intentions to actually make someone's life easier,
Yes.
and everything works out the way it's supposed to work. There's no bug, nothing is going wrong per se. It's just someone didn't think of what else can it be used for.
Exactly, and then are these security researchers, and that's why we can't have nice things.
Basically, sometimes we're the bullies that remove some interfaces from the good intended.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so it's also a bit our fault that some of the really cool features are removed now in CPUs.
Yeah, I remember actually back in Noia, I just like saw the news on the internet and everyone was panicking, and they said like, okay, now if you have an Intel PC, please disable hyperthreading because that might be able to solve it. And people were freaking out as, wow, my computer will have cost like $10,000 and it will perform like a $4,000 PC.
Yep.
And so I think not everyone was a fan of you back then.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
Also on the Reddit forums, they were quite rude.
So do you actually go there and talk to people and say, well, okay, I found this and let's see?
On the internet? No. I stopped arguing with strangers on the internet.
Okay.
I think that's
more like
and I'm more in the read-only phase now.
Yeah,
like,
right. Just
it's
lurking.
sometimes really amusing. So what people write
About your research.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I'm not personally offended anymore.
Yeah,
So,
I can't imagine that you have to turn that off.
yeah. But I think it's the same everywhere. Where if you improve safety, security of something, it's often a bit inconvenient and you lose something for that, and people don't like that. But yeah, in the end, it makes things better.
I mean,
on
it's
the
also
long
like
run.
always this iteration. So basically, if you find a vulnerability right now, the CPUs are not prepared for that. So the CPU vendors try to fix that with a workaround, with some let's say weird instruction or repurposing of things where you have like we reuse that instruction for something different, and it's like fixing it in production. So basically, you make a microcode update, and then you get this performance hits. But the next generation, they will be built with that in mind, and they will like fix that in hardware. We usually call hardware fixes basically, and then the performance penalty should go away. So for Meltdown, it was the case that we have now Meltdown fixed CPUs that no longer forward data if the permission bits are not checked correctly. So the overhead should be vanishing at some point.
Okay. But going back to Platypus, so then you start. That's all right. So then you started working on it as your master's thesis.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So at first we just looked at like Michael's experiments, like reconstructed, like how to slow down applications to match that resolution. And then at some point we had the idea to target these trusted execution environments with this super strong threat model. And then also at that point, Jo van Bulk was in Graz at some point. Mm-hmm. I think that was also...
He is also one of the researchers involved in many of these.
Okay, yes. So you're a close gang of people working together.
Yes, it's a nice collaborations around the world. So he's from Belgium, from KU Leuven.
Okay.
And yes, he's also one of the like brightest minds in this area.
All right.
And one of his projects back then was basically to build a framework that allows you to arbitrarily single-step victim code. So basically you can interrupt, let's say, an application after each of the executed instructions. And that's perfectly what we needed, because now we have the strong attack model where it makes sense to use these energy measurements. And also we have a tool to basically slow down the program even more beyond the possible things you had before. And then we can simply try to amplify this leakage in the enclaves, also in the applications we had, to get a measurable effect or observable power consumption for different things inside the program.
Okay, so you basically had to build like a baseline. So you had to say, okay, well, if I do this, the power consumption looks like this. If I do this, the power consumption looks like this. So afterwards, you could basically say, okay, the power consumption looks like this. So I can reasonably assume that the CPU is now doing
Yes. So basically, we looked at like branches inside this enclave. So basically, if you take the branch, then you have a different energy consumption if you don't take the branch.
Okay.
And it's basically like if you can attack these if-else chains, if-else branches, basically, you can break some sort of crypto. That was the first part with this non-constant, we call it non-constant time if you have branches and secret-dependent accesses in there. So we break this Aries A encryption was one thing we targeted.
Okay.
Yeah. But it turned out to be a lot more powerful because now we were able to slow down things and repeat things as often as we wanted. And in that, we even saw effects of the actual data. So we really saw physical effects of the CPU. The more zeros or the more ones you have in some data, down there is all binary, the more or less power consumption you have. So you can really infer something about the data that's used inside the CPU.
So that's also like a cheap explanation for this. Basically, think about a multiplication with 1. That doesn't change anything. So you can basically optimize that even further and say if I have a 1 in one operand, maybe the hardware just, okay, I have a 1, I can just forward the other operand to the result and I'm done. Yeah. And you see like huge energy differences if you switch these operands.
Okay. But can I only infer metadata about so can I only figure out what kind of data is being processed in the CPU, or can I also figure out the data?
That's actually a good point because this power analysis methods are known since the 80s.
Yeah.
Or even I'm not sure, but approximately the 80s. And there was this, you can use a model for the energy consumption, like a mathematical model, and basically query that. So you have like your observation, and then you ask the model, okay, from which operands could this origin from? And then there is like this AES encryption. Yeah. This is like really strong encryption used everywhere. And now Intel has like an instruction set to optimize that encryption so that they're high performant, high throughput, and they should not have side channel effects. So that was one goal of this instruction set there.
Okay.
And now we have like a tool to observe the operands in the energy consumption. And from the old style correlation power analysis attacks, that are called that way, we can now apply them to the new hardware with this interface on this side channel resistant instruction set and basically get the key out.
Okay, so you could actually, with this attack, could actually read out encryption keys.
Yeah, and then decrypt the encryption.
Okay, so you could have access to basically everything that's run on a CPU?
Yeah, basically everything that's encrypted.
Okay,
you can.
We target basically like a hard disk encryption. That was basically one use case.
Oh, okay, all right. So the encryption, because it's handled in the CPU, and then you could access files that were stored on, because you have the keys then. It's like
yes.
And the only limitation is you have to be able to trigger this encryption multiple times.
Okay.
Like millions of times, which is easy for hard disk encryption.
Yeah.
You just change the file or read a file. Yeah. But for things that are like one-time things, you can't do that.
Okay.
But for these things, yes.
So it's the equivalent of looking over the shoulder of someone when he's writing down a key, and then you have the key.
Yes, but he has to write it down 10,000.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Yeah, because there we then need real statistics.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of math involved.
Yeah, we always in this podcast we always get to the point where you're like you can say, but how do you do this? And we always end up with math.
Yeah, but I mean the main idea is not that complicated as Andy says. So like you have a model of how it would behave with this key, and then you measure and then see, does it correlate?
Yeah.
And where it correlates the best, that's the correct guess.
And then again, when you read that in that manual, your thought was, okay, this is known since the 80s. They must have thought of that.
Yes, but I mean, we have some experience with security and performance communities. So the thing is, the security community, they think like criminals most of the time. so they always think like, how can we break that? How can we exploit that? What can go wrong with that? And on the other side, you have the performance community. They want to go faster. And they don't really have that security mindset. For them, it's like, there are no criminals. It's just, we want to use them as fast as possible.
Yeah.
So they design the hardware and they don't think about the security implications of things like that. And we had discussions with them, like after Spectre. We talked to performance people and they say like, what do you mean with Spectre? So that's like how we designed it.
This is exactly what it's supposed to do.
It's like, and we're like, yeah, but it's a security problem. Don't you see that? And they're like, no, it behaves as we designed it. It's like,
not a
it's
bug,
documented
it's a
like
feature.
that.
Yeah.
Exactly. For them, it's a feature because it makes things faster. It's like, but it accesses data it's not supposed to access. And like, so what? But it's never functionally wrong.
Yeah.
It's faster and correct. So it's good.
Yeah. So
You have completely different mindsets there.
yeah.
And
so the challenge for a CPU vendor is to get both of these.
yes, you need to somehow combine both of the worlds and then say, okay, somebody comes up with a great performance optimization, but somebody else with a security mindset should check whether this is also secure, what they do. And we have seen in the past that this wasn't always the case. So now we are also losing some features that are super cool for performance, but from a security perspective, not ideal.
I would also currently, I'm a bit in the mindset that at some point we will have a cutoff. So there will be like a split between CPU vendors for performance CPUs that don't care about security and like general purpose CPUs that should care about security, where you have all these features in there. But some domains don't require security because they are shielded off from the outside world. If you run your code on your CPU and you're sure that you only run your code, I will see some arguments that you don't need the security fixes.
Yeah. So even if we're talking about something like very trivial like esports, if you have a gamer community and they have PCs completely built for gaming and they don't do anything else on that.
Yes, and generally if you don't share your hardware with somebody else, you don't need that much security.
Yeah.
I mean, always this remote exploitation thing always plays in a bit there. So if you have like esports community or a high gaming PC, you're usually connected to the internet. Yeah. So you need some sort of security.
Okay.
But let's say, I mean, if I have like my gaming PC where I only install, let's say Steam or something like that, and my Steam is two-factored, I mean, the worst thing that could happen is that somebody maybe steals my Steam key or my safe. It's hard to argue, but I see that. So usually if there's a new vulnerability out with some mitigations, the backlash is like you lose performance, and most of the people care only about performance. They never thought about, okay, there's my important data, so what if that gets somewhere? They don't care.
I mean, there's also something to argue about when it comes to all these exploits are fairly complicated, let's say. Or if you're an attacker, you probably won't do it like in an afternoon from your parents' basement, right? So I think you need some experience on how to employ all these techniques. So there's something to argue about. I mean, were they ever exploited? Will they be exploited? Are they being exploited right now?
That's always.
I mean, it's always the case. That's the first thing anyone asks when you come up
exactly,
with
and that's always a good point. And the thing is, I mean, we are here in academia. We want to do research. So what our goal is basically not provide attackers with something to exploit. We want to find the things before anybody else finds them, so they are fixed. And yes, right now we have a lot of software problems, and I would call them like the low-hanging fruit. And also misconfigurations are out there. So a normal attacker can find easy ways to take over systems.
Yeah.
But we hope that we like increase software security, and we already did that for the last years. So these things get rarer and rarer. And at some point, like you match with the hardware vulnerabilities, and at some point software exploits are as complicated as hardware exploits right now. And then attackers might switch to the hardware vulnerabilities. But by disclosing them already now, researching them now, when probably nobody is going to exploit them, we can already have them fixed at this point where they would have been used for exploits. So this is our goal, to like research them now, hope that nobody uses them. And when they become useful because other things are too complicated, they're already fixed.
All right.
But also some of them are very, very easy to exploit, like Meltdown. Like 1-2 days after publications, you already found proof of concepts online, publicly available, also really good ones that leak data, whatever you wanted. So they were dangerous and easy to exploit. So it was good that they were already fixed before. Others, yes, like Spectre is a lot more difficult to exploit.
But there was actually a use case where there was like exploit not released but leaked to the public. So there's like a malware thingy with the Spectre in the wild, is it called publicly, and basically used Spectre to basically resolve inodes. So inodes are the thing, the structures that basically point to files on your operating system. And basically they use Spectre to speculatively access this data there to resolve where the files are located in physical memory. So this was one use case where it actually was used.
And they use Spectre to read arbitrary files.
Yes, so
even inaccessible ones from other users from the operating system. And that was like bundled as an exploit that you were able to buy on the black market.
Okay. So there's some people using it, but I guess it's so if you would rank it, I would say social engineering is the easiest to get into the system, like always. Then software exploits, and then at some point you switch to hardware.
Okay.
At current state. So
just like maybe in a few sentences, what's the difference between Meltdown and Spectre? Because they are often like thrown into the same basket.
Yes, I mean from a high level perspective, they look very similar, but they have completely different root causes. So for Meltdown, you have this out of order execution, and in this out of order execution, permissions are not checked where they should be checked. Okay. So they're checked lazily afterwards, and then you access inaccessible data. For Spectre, it's about speculative execution. So where the CPU predicts what is going to happen next. Okay. And then it can mispredict and already do something that it could do normally as well, but not in the current execution path. So there, it predicts something, does something it can anyway do, but not at this point. Yeah. And with that, you then, with a few tricks, you can make it leak data, but it's a lot more difficult to do that because you have to really trick the CPU into speculating the wrong path that you want to execute.
And what I said before, hyperthreading from Intel, that relies heavily on speculative execution. Is that correct?
No. Hyperthreading has different problems that you run really in parallel, and that makes some of the things easier to exploit, like zombie load.
Oh, okay. So there's so many exploits.
There are so many exploits, so many bugs. Zombie load is like a variant of Meltdown. Okay. And you can see all the data that is currently used on your core.
So because you share a lot of resources if you use hyperthreading. So if you use hyperthreading, you share half of the CPU core with a different core, basically a different program at the same time. And that's the main part, I guess. So you have the same caches then. And that's the point where zombie load kicks in, right?
Yeah, with zombie load, you see the data that's used on your CPU core. And this is normally okay-ish because you're the only one running on your core. But if you have hyperthreading, somebody else can run on the same core in parallel, then also see this data. And this is something that is still not fixed.
Okay. So it's still there.
It's still there. So on all the CPUs that are affected, if you have hyperthreading enabled, anybody can steal all your data. Even with the newest updates.
That sounds,
not good.
I guess I can sleep better at night now.
but if you disable hyperthreading, then nothing is running in parallel.
I'll lose at least 10 FPS then.
Probably. you lose half your cores, yeah.
Okay, so I think I can summarize that you've been very busy the last few years in, as I've said in the beginning, making CPU vendors' lives a bit harder, but also make our CPUs safer. But back to you too and your corporation, because I think it was only 3 weeks ago or so, you found another exploit and released it. And it's called Epic. Can you tell us a little bit about it? And also maybe tell us a little bit about how you find that and how you disclose it to CPU vendors.
Yes. Andy, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So Epic came, so Epic Leak, we call it Epic. We will come to the name a bit later, but that all started out around Christmas 2021. And back then, Pietro Borello was at AUI, in Graz, as guest student there. He is from Rome, Italy. And we started looking at this MMIO range. So an MMIO range is basically a memory mapped IO, also memory mapped input-output, into your CPU to basically perform, you access a memory location, and the memory location then triggers something in the hardware somewhere else. And we're actually researching something different back then and tried to look at these MMO ranges there. And at some point, Pietro accessed one of these MMO ranges and got back data he did not expect. And basically the data was really, it was really like you would imagine it in a hacker movie, like you access a random location and suddenly you get like back strings. And we know that from that location, there should not come back like usernames from the system or something like Michael suggested with the just open a file on the hyperthread and just let's cut the file. And suddenly you read the strings back from that memory location that makes totally no sense in the first 10 minutes you look at it. And I think
that was great. That confused Pietro a lot. He was like, I'm seeing random data. And I was like, open a huge file. And he was like, why? Like, open a huge file. Just do it. And like, okay. And like, doesn't change anything. Like, what is huge? Like, I open a few kilobytes. Like, no, open a file that has a few hundred megabytes. And it's like, why? Like, just do it. and he opened that file and like, whoa, I'm seeing the file content there where I shouldn't see anything.
Okay.
And then his favorite quote was, his legendary quote was, so I'm confused, I'm going to sleep. It was like early in the morning and like always if you find something interesting, you poke it around until you try to understand it. And it was like the cutoff from the first day.
There's nothing to gain tonight. I have to sleep.
Yeah, that took us then a few days to actually weeks.
Yes, to reverse where that leakage is coming from.
Yeah.
And also like it is, so we had like a lab setup in Graz and we tried to do research in a different direction. And Pietro was like sitting in the lab and we have like all these computers there. And he was like booting in a special USB stick, like operating system all set up and prepared, like booting each different PC. And suddenly he had found like one PC where he saw that leakage and that was like the kickoff from Epic Leak.
Yeah.
And then Michael and Moritz, they analyzed the leakage a lot, so where it's coming from.
Yes, so we tried a lot of things. I mean, it's one thing that happens for many of the vulnerabilities. You see some data you don't expect to see. And in the past, we often said like it's noise. But there is no noise. Like a computer is a deterministic system. Mm-hmm. And we have like this mantra, like, noise is just somebody else's data. Mm-hmm. We just need to figure out who that somebody else is.
Okay.
And that often takes a while. And you try like, okay, when do I see that data? Like when opening a huge file, like, okay, it must have something to do with the memory. And then you come up with different ideas, like where could it come from? Then you write programs that exactly use this part of the CPU where you think it comes from and try to see, is this leakage there or not?
It's like a chain of experiments would explain it. So you start off like, okay, if I only touch registers in my CPU, can I ever see leakage? No, okay, so I don't know. So I know it's not coming from the registers. Next step, the first level cache. And you go one step further and further. Mm-hmm. And basically at some point we had like DRAM filled with data, doesn't leak. We had like the caches filled with data, doesn't leak. But if you move it between, suddenly it leaks. And so what component is between the caches and the DRAM? The caches and the small, the smaller caches and the larger caches.
So it's really like a natural science.
Okay.
And this is where we are currently at computer science, that our systems are so complex that we don't understand what's going on. And we have to do experiments like in physics or in chemistry. Just try different things, come up with hypotheses and see if it works or if it doesn't work, and then come to conclusions.
But maybe taking a step back, I mean, Epic was, again, made quite some waves around the internet and around the tech community because it's a leak that really shouldn't exist. I mean, the others were tough to exploit maybe, but...
Yes, but this one was like trivial to exploit.
I mean, because it's actually not a side channel. So basically, let's resolve the name. So it's Epic with Epic from being Epic. Yeah. And then the region we used is the Epic with a region. Okay. That's basically like this memorable region. And that's an architecturally defined region. And basically, if you just read from that, you get back the data. And that's the huge difference between Meltdown and between this and Meltdown is for Meltdown, you need to encode it in a side channel to later recover it. And this recovering step is not needed because you get directly back the data and can just read from it, do whatever you want with it.
And that's again something that's basically in the manual.
Yes.
If you look at the manual, it's like, here's this region defined called epic, and you can read that, and you get back the ID of the chip. If you read that, you get back some kind of timestamp, and then there's this region, and you should not read that.
And that's exactly what stands there in the manual. And it was also like
Yes.
our kickoff slide for the Black Hat talk. Like, so I get back data. And so, okay, what does the Intel manual say? You should not read from this. And then so, okay, let's try it. Let's read from it.
Okay, so Intel just says, please don't look there. There's nothing to see.
Exactly.
Yes, it states if you read from that, you get undefined, uninitialized, or some sort of data. So some
it's
wording like that.
Don't look here. Here be dragons.
Yeah.
It's forbidden.
Off
so-
limits.
Okay, I mean, that solves the problem. No hacker would ever look there.
Exactly.
I mean, for their defense, if you read from that region from all the CPUs, you actually get back zeros or nothing interesting.
Okay.
But our theory is that they changed something between generations to optimize a bit more, like performance guys. Maybe, we don't know. But then this bug was introduced, or this non-feature was introduced.
Yeah.
But
So it
because,
only applies to later CPU models?
Yes.
And it only applies to Intel, or did you also test it on other?
Only Intel, only like generation 10 and newer.
Okay.
It's like the really new ones.
Yeah.
So another reason to buy a new CPU.
But this has been fixed now? Is it fixable via a software update, or is it something that can only be mitigated in some way?
So there again, the threat model thing comes into play. So in order to read from that region, you need to be root or operating system or the hypervisor.
Yeah.
And then again, we have Intel SGX, basically this trusted execution environments that allows for such privileged attackers. So for a normal operating system use case where you just want to have your eSport machine, you don't care.
Yeah.
You don't need it because if your operating system is compromised, okay.
Yeah.
You are screwed anyway.
Yeah.
And for the SGX case, you could use this region to leak confidential data from this SGX enclaves, and you should not be able to do that. And for that, they released microcode updates and fixes in during transitions in and out of enclaves. So they fixed it, but it has a performance cost again if you transition in and out.
And when you try this, do you try what you can get out of it? Like, do you try out what you can steal from that?
That was one really good motivation point for me, because now we had this super cool side channel, and I always wanted to, like, I've read Yo's paper and where they extracted the ceiling. So this SGX ecosystem uses a few cryptographic keys in order to establish the guarantees they have.
Yeah.
And there's like one key that is super important, because if you have that, you can basically fake identities.
So SGX means?
A software guard extension.
Okay, so it's a feature by Intel.
Yes.
That's the trusted execution environment that's, for example, used for your fingerprint reader,
Okay.
where it stores the biometric data.
Okay, so it's like a high-level security safe inside.
It's a guarantee from the CPU, basically to some sort of user. So it's more for cloud environments you have to think of, because there the computer or the CPU is owned by the vendor of the cloud, and then you as user, you give them their code, and you would like to have the code executed as I gave it to them, so that they don't modify it, that I'm sure that it's not tampered with, the integrity is correct and everything. And that's where SGX kicks in.
And their cryptographic keys guarantee that nothing has been tampered with.
Yes, it's highly complex, but this one key basically allows you to break this trust.
Okay.
Then we are back at math again.
Yes, it's always
and it's
math.
It's not so Tilly-aric to explain.
But you went for the Intel private key that only Intel should know.
Okay. And it was like I'm swimming with blindfold in code, and you can super easily leak data, but you have to know what you leak.
You have to know what you're looking for.
Yes.
Okay.
And then basically we build a framework to basically single step this target enclave and leak arbitrary registers. And at some point in 5 a.m. in the morning, I got like the key back, and I encrypted this thing, and I said okay, and it was nice. I go sleeping now.
and what could you theoretically do with that code?
You could fake being a genuine Intel CPU.
Okay.
So you can build an emulator that tells you it's an Intel CPU, but it's just an emulator, and you can see all the data.
Afterwards, it comes out.
And you can just dump all the data.
And basically you can if I go back to that example where I send you the code and SGX says, okay, this code is now executed and it is as it is.
Yeah.
And then I could say back, this code is executed as it is, but I could modify it and give you that, okay, it should be executed as it is, but it is not. And that allows you for basically, for let's say DRM or something like that, where you have like an encoded video stream to somebody who wants to watch, let's say, a movie or something like that. And then if I can fake that, I can basically take the video stream, decode it, and have the video.
So I could hack Netflix with your code.
I'm not sure what Netflix internally uses, but we often use the example because it makes more sense.
Yeah, Blu-ray used that.
Yeah.
In the past, and I've seen it on the internet. Some people were really excited in some underground forums. It's like, whoa, now we have a primitive to get the key out of there, and then we can decrypt any Blu-ray movie and easily leak the 4K version then.
Oh, okay.
So that's
so,
but it's of course illegal.
Yeah, I mean, so Intel.
But these keys are powerful, and this is something that many people don't get about the attack. I was like, it's so complicated to mount, and nobody is going to mount it on like your computer to get something from you. It's like, it's not necessary. We do that on one machine, on our own machine, extract Intel's private key out of that. And with that, we can basically decrypt everything else that uses that, like Blu-ray.
Yeah, or servers, basically. Cloud servers.
Yes.
Okay.
So basically any CPU, so if you target, so basically it's per CPU, so if you have one CPU and you extract the key, you can basically impersonate that CPU. Yeah. So basically suddenly an AMD CPU could say, I'm an Intel CPU in some exotic way. I wouldn't say that they do that, but that's the idea of that.
All right. And okay, then when you found that, what happened next? Like you write an email to Intel. They probably by now have like a big red light that says Michael Schwarz and Andreas Kogler from TU Graz and CISPA have written. Now everyone has to return to our home base, and we have to figure out how to fix that. How does that look?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, you write a small report, explain the most basic things about that. You also provide like a simple reproducer that they can run and see that it works, and you send them that email. And we did that mistake in the past many times. We usually worked on that, like started beginning of the week. We had something by the end of the week. We sent that email on Friday. and they specifically asked us to please don't send the things on Friday because then things like that happen. Like people have to come look at that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think that's the only reason why they should hate us for making their weekend disappear.
But yes, then you send that like on a Monday, Tuesday to be nice. Send that to them and then wait. And typically you have some call then afterwards to discuss more details where they want to know more stuff and then.
Also for the Epic, we had like another hypothesis in order to amplify the leakage there. And then we had like a good call with them and like explaining our hypothesis, and we did not get much feedback from them, but yeah, we get some feedback.
Okay.
And
yes, they also have to analyze that internally, of course, because we come up with a theory, and that is usually not 100% correct.
Yeah,
because we don't know the internals.
Yeah, sure.
So they also start their internal investigation. They look at their internal designs, their source code, and see what is actually going on.
And they don't share all that much with you?
No, they can't. That's all intellectual property, trade secrets. But at the end, they're typically quite nice, and it tells like, I wouldn't be ashamed of publishing your idea or something like that. And it's like, okay, it's close enough that that they're fine with that. And if it's like completely wrong, they also tell us like, don't write that in a paper. That's not good.
All right. So do you have contacts? Do you know the people there? Is it just you write to an email that says disclosure at Intel or so?
I mean, meanwhile, we know a few people there.
Yeah.
From different levels, from management level down to.
Also, we met them in person back 4 weeks ago at the conference.
We had beers with the people. So
okay. So there's like a fairly easy relationship going with them because basically you help each other.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. You make their product safer and they have a safer product. Yeah. And you have some.
If you say it like that, it sounds like a win-lose situation.
No, I mean it makes sense. I mean
But it's always good to have like good contacts to industry as well, also for funding opportunities.
So I think the only question that remains is, when did you two decide to not become criminals?
Did we decide that?
Or is it still like an ongoing decision? It's always
Depends on the funding situation. No, just kidding.
I don't know.
I mean, you could also always join CISPA. I hear they have fairly good tenure track positions.
Yeah, I can confirm that. No, it's I prefer to make the world a safer place, and exploiting things. I mean, yes, it's fun in like a safe environment, but you can do that. But it's also like, if you're a criminal, you're like always on the run, and you do that, and you have this pressure to always find new things because they are fixed when they are discovered. And yeah, probably you can make good money, but you're not going to make a lot of friends.
Yeah.
And
it's also like
I prefer the legal path, because also in the legal path you can make a lot of money with that.
And also, it's like if you publish it, you have like it's like more ego thing. You have your name attached to.
You like the fame, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes. And if you're a criminal, you attach your name to it. I mean, okay, nice.
Yeah,
you're screwed.
So I think you two are like in the scene. You're fairly famous as well, right? So people know you when you come to a conference.
Yes. Yeah. Many people do.
Okay,
and that's also nice.
Yeah.
And sometimes you are on TV or in the newspapers, and that's like what your parents and grandparents like.
I guess for Michael and me, it's always like poking around in CPUs you don't know, and like trying to understand them, like this black box approach.
So when Apple released their new CPU lineup last year, it was like Christmas for you.
Yeah, we also have that upstairs.
Okay. So can we expect something in the future? I'm not allowed to discuss this as of now.
I can neither confirm nor verify that.
Okay, I guess like if we take a look at your track record in the last few years, I wouldn't hold my breath that there won't be something new cooking. So
there always is. There always is. And yeah, it's a fun process. It's fun, like poking around, finding something, and then letting the others fix that mess.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly good point to end on. So thank you very much for being here. Also, Andreas, I hope you enjoyed your visit here in CISPA at Saarbrücken. Cool. Maybe you'll be back one day. Okay, then have a nice day, guys. And
thanks.
Yeah, keep making the world a safer place.
We will. Thanks a lot.
Ciao. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.